Tabena Okafor had survived a lot of things in her 29 years of life. She had survived her Auntie Ngozi's cooking. She had survived 3 Lagos traffic jams that lasted longer than some marriages. She had survived a university roommate who played gospel music at 2 in the morning and called it spiritual warfare. She had survived all of that. What she had not expected to survive was the morning Ryu Seo-jin, CEO of RSJ Holdings, the most feared man in the entire Seoul business district, picked up her carefully prepared double-shot espresso, looked at it like it had personally insulted 7 generations of his ancestors, and then walked calmly to the window of his 35th floor office, opened it, and dropped it into the wind. Not through, dropped, like a man releasing a bird. Tabena stood at his office door, unfolder pressed against her chest, mouth open. The cup fell 35 floors. She did not hear it land. What she did hear was Ryu Seo-jin turning back to his desk, straightening his cuffs, and saying in a voice so calm it was almost meditative, "I asked for oat milk." Tabena blinked. "You're lactose intolerant on Tuesdays?" He looked at her. She looked at him. She made a mental note. Tuesday, oat milk. Do not test this man. That was 3 years ago. Now, 3 years later, she was standing in that same office, a resignation letter in her hand, a plane ticket to London burning a hole in her bag, and absolutely zero intention of staying 1 second longer than necessary. She placed the letter on his desk. He read it. He set it down. He looked up at her. And then, one in the same calm voice he used to destroy stock markets and silence boardrooms, Ryu Seo-jin said 3 words. "No, you're not." And that, ladies and gentlemen, is where everything fell apart. If you have ever stood in front of someone who looked at your resignation letter like it was a drink order they were returning, drop a comment below and tell me where you're watching from. Because Tabena's pain is universal. And if you love dramatic romance stories like this one, the kind where someone refuses to let go and you cannot decide if that's romantic or deeply concerning, subscribe right now. We post every week, and I promise, this story is going to make you feel things you were not prepared for today. 3 years earlier, Tabena did not want to apply for the job. That was the honest truth. Seon, she was sitting in a Korean fried chicken restaurant in Itaewon, eating aggressively because she had just lost her translation consultant contract, and her friend Somi was across the table from her talking too fast and gesturing too wide as she always did when she had an idea Tabena was going to hate. "Just listen," Somi said. "I am listening," Tabena replied, pulling a drumstick apart. "I'm listening and eating so that my mouth is busy and I can't say something rude." Somi put both hands flat on the table. "RSJ Holdings is hiring?" Tabena chewed. "They need an executive operations lead, not an assistant. Operations lead, it's different." Tabena swallowed. "Somi. The pay, Somi, is extraordinary." Tabena put the drumstick down. "Who is the CEO of RSJ Holdings?" Somi hesitated. That hesitation was answer enough. "Oh, Ryu Seo-jin," Tabena said flatly. "He's not that bad. He shut down an entire department because someone used the wrong font in a presentation." That was exaggerated. "The font was Comic Sans, Somi. At a board meeting, I understand the reaction." Somi laughed despite herself. "Okay, that one was fair, but Tabena, listen. He's not looking for someone who's afraid of him. His last 3 operations leads left because they were terrified. He needs someone who can handle pressure." "I can handle pressure. I know. I just prefer not to." "The salary," Somi said carefully, "would clear your remaining student debt, your parents' medical bills, and still leave enough for you to actually eat food that isn't discounted at midnight." Tabena picked up her chicken again. Chewed, thought, student debt, medical bills. On midnight discounts. She sighed so heavily the table almost moved. "If this man throws anything at me," she said, "I am leaving." Somi clapped both hands. "Yes. And I mean anything, a pen, a folder, a look that is too aggressive. I'm gone." "Of course. And if he's one of those bosses who breathes dramatically, he probably is." "Somi. I mean, no, he's totally normal." Tabena narrowed her eyes. "Send me the job description." 3 days later, she walked into the RSJ Holdings building in Gangnam, and the first thing she thought was, This building is trying to intimidate people on purpose. 60 floors, glass and steel, and the kind of architecture that said money so loudly you could feel it in your back teeth. The lobby alone had more square footage than her entire apartment block. Once she straightened her blazer, cobalt blue because she refused to wear gray or black like everyone else in the lobby, who all looked like they had been color-corrected into corporate compliance, and walked to the reception desk. The receptionist looked at her blazer, then at her face, then at the blazer again. "Executive Operations Lead interview?" Tabena said pleasantly. "28th floor," the receptionist said carefully. "Take the left elevator." "Thank you." The interview itself was almost startlingly smooth. 3 members of the HR panel, competency questions, scenario planning, crisis management. Tabena answered everything directly, without flinching, without padding her answers with unnecessary apologies, and at one point gently corrected the panel moderator's assumption about supply chain restructuring, on which she could tell flustered him slightly, and she felt zero guilt about that. At the end, the senior HR director said, "You're very direct." "Yes," Tabena agreed. "Mr. Ryu prefers efficiency." "So do I. He's not an easy man to work for." "I'm not an easy person to rattle." The woman looked at her for a long moment. "You'll meet him tomorrow." And just like that, she was through. That evening, she called her mother in Lagos. "Mummy, I think I got a new job." "Doing what?" "Operations lead, very big company." "Is the boss a good man?" Tabena thought about everything she had read about Ryu Seo-jin, the business empire, the cold efficiency, the 3 operations leads who had left in 18 months. "He's a professional," she said. Her mother paused. "That means difficult." "He might be." Tabena. "Mummy, all the money is very good." Another pause. Then, with the resigned wisdom of a woman who had raised 4 children and buried her worries in prayer. "If he shouts at you, shout back, quietly." That's contradictory advice. Most good advice is, go and get the job. The next morning, Tabena stood outside Ryu Seo-jin's office on the 35th floor and understood immediately why 3 people had quit. The office itself was silent in a way that did not feel empty. It felt occupied. It felt like walking into a room that was paying attention. She knocked once. "Come in." She pushed open the door. Ryu Seo-jin was standing at the floor-to-ceiling window with his back to her, reviewing something on a tablet. He did not turn around. Tabena walked in, stopped at the appropriate distance from the desk, and waited. 5 seconds. 10. And she had done her research. He did this on purpose. It was a test. How long before someone cleared their throat or shifted their weight or said something just to break the silence? Tabena did none of those things. She simply stood there, folder in hand, expression calm, and waited as if she had nowhere else to be and all the time in the world. At 20 seconds, Ryu Seo-jin turned around. He was younger than she expected. 34, maybe 35. Sharp face, dark eyes, the kind of stillness that came from a man who had learned long ago that the person who speaks first in silence is usually the weaker one. He wore a dark suit, no tie. There was a small scar near his left jawline that none of the press photos had shown. He looked at her. She looked at him. "You didn't say anything," he said. You didn't ask a question," she replied. Something moved at the corner of his eye. Not quite a blink, not quite a reaction. "Tabena Okafor." "Yes. Nigerian." "Last time I checked. Your Korean is excellent." "Thank you. Your English is also excellent." He studied her. "You corrected Director Huang during your interview?" He was incorrect. "He's been here 11 years. "That doesn't make him right." Ryu Seo-jin sat down slowly. His posture was perfectly straight. He folded both hands on the desk. "Why do you want this position?" "The work is complex. I don't enjoy simple work." "My previous operations leads found it too complex." "They also found you too complex. I suspect that was the larger problem." A pause. "You're very confident," he said. "I'm very prepared." "Oh, and that looks the same from the outside." He looked at her for one more long moment. Then he picked up the tablet again. "You start Monday." Tabena nodded once. Understood. She turned to leave. "Miss Okafor." She stopped, turned back. "You'll find," he said without looking up, that I don't repeat instructions. Noted, she said. You'll find I don't need them repeated. She left. In the elevator going down, she exhaled slowly and thought, this man is going to be exhausting. She was right, but she was also, in a way she could not fully name yet, completely fascinated. The first 3 months were a masterclass in controlled chaos. RSJ Holdings was not a normal company. It operated across 6 industries: logistics, real estate development, private security contracts, technology investment, hospitality, and in something labeled in the internal system simply as special projects, which Tabena quickly learned to never ask about directly. The office had 43 employees on the executive floor alone. Every single one of them was afraid of Ryu Seo-jin, not in a dramatic, visible way, in the quiet way of people who walked faster past his office and answered their phones before the first ring if his name appeared on the screen. Tabena observed all of this. She catalogued it. And then she went to work. Within 2 weeks, she had restructured the operations reporting timeline so that nothing landed on his desk without being filtered through her review first. Within a month, she had caught 3 budget errors that had been silently accumulating for over a year. Within 6 weeks, she had renegotiated 2 supplier contracts that were bleeding the company at the margins, and Ryu Seo-jin found out about it not from her report, but because the supplier called him personally to complain about the woman who had sat across from him for 4 hours and refused to move until the numbers were right. He summoned her to his office. She walked in calmly. You renegotiated the Jinsung contract, he said. Yes. Without approval. I sent you a memo on Monday. I didn't respond. You also didn't say no. She tilted her head slightly. I interpreted silence as permission. He stared at her. That is not how this company works. The contract was hemorrhaging money. Did you want me to wait for a calendar slot while it continued? A pause. The new terms, he said carefully. One saved the company 400 million won annually. Yes. He looked at her. Don't do that again without explicit sign-off. Understood. Would you like to establish a standing approval threshold so I know when to escalate versus act? Another pause. Longer this time. Yes, he said finally. Draft one. She drafted it that afternoon. He approved it within the hour. And from that day forward, a very specific, very unusual working relationship began to take shape between Tabena Okafor and Ryu Seo-jin. She was the only person on that floor who walked into his office without hesitating at the door. She was the only person who sent him memos that ended with direct questions instead of deferential suggestions. She was the only person who, when he said, "The Hong Kong meeting needs to move," replied, "To when and why?" Because Director Lim has been trying to delay that meeting for 3 weeks, and I need to know if this is strategic or if you're letting him win. The first time she said that, Ryu Seo-jin had gone very still. Then he said, "Move it back 1 week and have someone monitor Lim's schedule." Tabena made the note. Already on it. She left. He sat in the silence of his office and thought, where has this woman been? Somi called her every other week for updates that became increasingly dramatic. He threw a phone last Thursday, Tabena said during one call. Into what? The Han River. We were on a site visit. He got a call from a contractor who lied to him. He looked at the phone for about 3 seconds. Then he walked to the railing and dropped it in. Somi was quiet. Tabena. Into the river, Somi. When the Han River. Are you okay? I was fine. I was the one who had been warning him about that contractor for 6 weeks. Tabena paused. I was also secretly a little impressed. You are not normal. I know, but you should have seen the contractor's face on the call when the line went dead. Somi laughed so hard she choked. What Tabena did not tell Somi, because she was still sorting it out herself, was that working for Ryu Seo-jin was unlike anything she had experienced before. Not because of the intensity, not because of the company scale, but because beneath all of it, beneath the silence and the phone throwing and the boardrooms that went quiet when he walked in, she could see him thinking, really thinking. Not just reacting, not just deciding, processing, weighing. And sometimes, when a problem was complicated enough, and he would turn toward her in the middle of a meeting and ask a question he never asked anyone else. What am I missing? The first time he said it, every person in the room had turned to look at her in surprise. She had simply answered, and from that moment, something shifted. The second year was when the real complications started. Not between them, not yet. The complications came from outside. RSJ Holdings was powerful, but power, as Tabena had come to understand, attracted everything in equal measure, opportunity and threat. And the threat that entered their world in the second year came wearing expensive shoes and a very polished smile. His name was Director Bae Tae-young. He joined the company as head of strategic development, handpicked by the RSJ board, and which was itself made up of men who had known Ryu Seo-jin's family since before he took over the company at 28, after his father stepped down. Bae Tae-young was smooth, charming, the kind of man who made everyone in a room feel individually seen in a way that, if you looked closely, was entirely deliberate. Tabena looked closely. She did not feel individually seen. She felt individually assessed. Their first meeting was in the operations briefing room. Bae Tae-young arrived 3 minutes early, which in her experience meant he had done research on how the floor operated, looked around the room, and then looked at her. Operations lead? Yes. Tabena Okafor. She raised an eyebrow. You've read my file. He smiled. I read everyone's file. That sounds exhausting. He laughed. You're exactly how the file described. What did the file say? Direct, strategic, unimpressed by position. Accurate, she said. What did your file say about you? He blinked once, just once. That was the tell. He had not expected the return. Smart, he said finally. Ambitious, good at reading people. Also accurate? I prefer to think so. That evening, Tabena sent Ryu Seo-jin a one-line note. Watch Bae Tae-young. She expected silence. That was usually what she got on after-hours messages. What she received instead, 4 minutes later, was, already am. Something about those 2 words settled her. But the director was clever. Over the next several months, Bae Tae-young operated with such surgical precision inside RSJ Holdings that even Tabena had to give him credit. He built alliances, he delivered results. When he made himself useful in exactly the right ways to exactly the right people, and every once in a while, he would find a reason to be near Tabena in a way that felt natural until you counted the frequency. A question about a supplier negotiation, a second opinion on a logistics model, a casual stop in the corridor that turned into a 20-minute conversation. None of it was inappropriate. All of it was deliberate. One afternoon, he stopped at her desk. The Busan expansion briefing, he said. I need your read on the infrastructure numbers before I take them to the board. Tabena looked up. Send them to me. I was thinking we review them together, over dinner. She held his gaze. Send them to me, she repeated pleasantly. I'll have notes back to you by end of day. He smiled, held up both hands. Wine efficient as advertised. When he left, she looked back at her screen and thought, that man is going to be a problem. She was, once again, right. What she did not expect was the form that problem would take. If you're enjoying this story so far, please like this video right now and drop a comment telling me if you would have trusted Bae Tae-young, because I have a feeling this community is going to be very divided. Subscribe if you haven't already, because what happens next in this story changed everything. The turning point happened on a Wednesday night. Tabena was working late, which was not unusual, because a consortium deal that was supposed to close in 2 weeks had suddenly developed complications on the legal side. She was in the conference room on the 35th floor. Papers spread across the entire length of the table, cold coffee at her elbow, when she heard voices from the corridor. Ryu Seo-jin's office door was slightly open. She was not eavesdropping. She was simply close enough to hear. What she heard was Bae Tae-young's voice, still smooth, still perfectly measured, saying, The Okafor woman is a liability. She has too much access. A pause, then Ryu Seo-jin's voice. Why? She's not from here. She doesn't understand how relationships work in this industry. She sends memos that read like audit reports. She makes suppliers uncomfortable. She saves the company money. She makes the board nervous. The board should be nervous. They weren't paying attention. SEO Jin. A slight shift in tone, more familiar, more deliberate. You've given her access to the special projects division. And that was not in her contract. A very long silence. Then, that will be all, Tae-young. Tabena sat very still in the conference room. Special projects. She had always known, that special projects was not just a label. In the first year, she had learned enough to understand that RSJ Holdings had a shadow layer, that the man who sat in that calm, still office had a background that predated the business empire, that the scar near his jaw was not from a car accident as his official biography suggested, and that the people who worked in the building's basement level did not interact with the rest of the staff in the usual way. She had learned this the way she learned everything, by watching, by not asking the wrong questions, by waiting until she understood enough to ask the right ones. And then she had never once used what she knew. She had never gossiped, never hinted, never leveraged it. Which was why, the next morning when Ryu Seo-jin called her into his office and said, "Sit down," she did not feel afraid. She sat. He stood at the window. Back to her again. Old habit. "How much do you know?" he said. About? About what this company actually does. She considered being vague. She decided against it. Enough to understand why you need an operations lead who doesn't ask certain questions, and enough to understand that what I've never asked about, I will never speak about. He turned around. His expression was unreadable in the way that, after 2 years, she had learned to read anyway. He was not angry. He was calculating. "Oh, Bae Tae-young thinks you're a risk." "Bae Tae-young wants my access so he can have yours," she said simply. Ryu Seo-jin looked at her. "He's been building a file," she continued. "Not on me, on you. He's gathering information, the dinner invitations, the shared briefings. He's been running parallel intelligence on every project I touch because every project I touch runs through your desk." A silence. "You know this," he said. It was not a question. "I noticed the pattern 8 months ago. And you didn't tell me. I sent you a one-line message the week he arrived." He was quiet. Then, "Watch Bae Tae-young. You said already am." He looked at her for a very long moment. Then he sat down. The way he sat was different, less formal, like a man who had just made a decision he wasn't going to take back. "Mud, I've been managing it," he said. "I know. He's connected to people I cannot simply remove." "I know that too." "You're not afraid." Tabena tilted her head. "Of Bae Tae-young? No, he's clever, but he's not operating on instinct. He's operating on a plan. Plans have gaps. People running on instinct find those gaps faster." He studied her. "You're describing yourself," he said. "I'm describing the advantage." Another silence. This one was different. Then, "There's a shareholders' dinner next Friday. I have it on the calendar. I need you there. As operations lead." He paused. "Yes." Tabena nodded. "I'll prepare the briefing materials." She stood up. "Tabena." She stopped. It was the first time in 2 years that he had used her first name in anything other than a formal introduction. She turned back. "Mine, the Special Projects Division," he said carefully, "is being restructured. I'll be moving some of those files to your oversight." She looked at him steadily. "That's a significant decision." "Yes." "The board won't like it." "The board doesn't like a lot of things." "Bae Tae-young will escalate." "Yes." "And you want to force that escalation now rather than later." His eyes met hers. "You understand very quickly." "I always have." She left. In the elevator, she pressed the button for the 33rd floor and then stood perfectly still and thought, something just changed. She was right about that too. The shareholders' dinner was held at a hotel in Gangnam on a Friday evening, in a ballroom that cost more to rent for a single night than most people earned in a year. Tabena arrived 12 minutes early. She always arrived early, wearing a deep burgundy dress and earrings that her mother had given her when she passed her postgraduate examinations, and carrying a tablet in her hand because she was, first and foremost, always at work. She did not wear heels. She wore structured flats, which she had made a firm personal policy after her first corporate event in Seoul, when a fire alarm had forced an evacuation, and she had watched 4 women in stilettos try to descend 3 flights of stairs with the urgency of people who had reconsidered every fashion decision they had ever made. Life was short. Comfort was real. She was reviewing the evening's agenda near the entrance when Bae Tae-young appeared beside her. Tabena. His voice was warm, too warm. "Oh, I'm Director Bae. You look lovely." "Thank you." She did not return the compliment. She returned to the tablet. "You know," he said, stepping slightly closer, "this doesn't have to be adversarial." She looked up. "What doesn't?" "Our working relationship." "I wasn't aware it was adversarial." He smiled. "You've been blocking my access to 3 divisions for 4 months. I've been following the operations protocol you yourself agreed to in your contract." "Tobena." A softer tone now. "I'm not your enemy." "I didn't say you were." "Then have a drink with me after this. Talk, properly." She studied him for a moment. He was very good at this. The pivot from strategy to charm was seamless. Another woman in another situation might have been convinced. Tabena thought of her mother's voice. "If he shouts at you, shout back." One quietly. "Director Bae," she said pleasantly, "I think we understand each other perfectly well already. We don't need a drink for that." She turned back to the tablet. He left. The dinner itself began smoothly. Shareholders, investors, board members. The kind of gathering where every conversation was a negotiation and every compliment came with a purpose. Tabena moved through the room with the ease of someone who had learned early that confidence in any room comes not from belonging there, but from deciding you belong. She confirmed 3 meeting schedules, deflected a very nosy inquiry from a board member's wife, handed Ryu Seo-jin a note mid-conversation that rerouted a discussion heading in the wrong direction, which he read in 2 seconds flat and then smoothly steered the conversation exactly where she had suggested. And he didn't look at her, but she saw the faint shift in his jaw that, by now, she had catalogued as his version of acknowledgement. They had developed a language without words, the two of them, which was, she recognized somewhere quiet inside herself, both impressive and slightly dangerous. Halfway through the evening, a woman entered the room, and the room noticed, not in the ordinary way of noticing, in the way of a room that was already watching everything and suddenly had a new reference point. Park Ji-soo was 32, the daughter of Park Enterprises chairman, and had been linked to Ryu Seo-jin in the press for approximately 6 months in the way that press linked powerful people, with photographs and speculation in sources that were definitely not anonymous. She was elegant, immaculately put together, and then she entered the room with the measured grace of someone who had been taught from birth to be seen without appearing to try. She moved directly toward Ryu Seo-jin. He saw her before she reached him. His posture did not change, but something went very still. Tabena, standing 3 people away, observed the entire exchange. The greeting, the formal cool, the way Ji-soo smiled and he did not quite smile back, the way her hand touched his arm briefly and he did not move away but also did not move toward. And then, because Tabena was Tabena, she went back to the tablet. An hour later, she was standing near the drinks table reviewing logistics notes when she felt someone beside her. "Ji-soo, you must be Tabena Okafor," the woman said. Tabena looked up. "Yes, I've heard about you." There was no warmth in it. But no coldness either, just measurement. "I hope it was complimentary." "It was thorough." Ji-soo held her glass lightly. "You've been with the company 3 years." "Yes." "Longer than any operations lead before you." "Yes." "What's your secret?" Tabena considered the question. "I don't confuse the company's needs with my own." Ji-soo tilted her head. "That's a very careful answer." "It's a very true one." A pause. "He trusts you," Ji-soo said. Less question than observation. "He trusts competence." "No." Jisoo's gaze was direct now. "He trusts you, specifically. I've known Seo-jin for 5 years. I've never seen him trust someone who isn't from his world." Tabena held her gaze. "I am from his world. His world is work." Something moved in Jisoo's expression, not anger, something closer to recognition. "Oh yes," she said quietly. "I think that might be the problem." Before Tabena could answer, there was a sudden shift in the room's energy, the kind of shift that happened when something went wrong and powerful people had to decide very quickly whether to address it or pretend. It was Bae Tae-young. He was standing near the front of the room with a small group of board members, and he was speaking, calmly, too calmly, loudly enough to carry, about a document. A specific document, one that, from the 3 words Tabena caught before she was already moving, came from the Special Projects Division. She crossed the room in 12 seconds. She reached the group before Ryu Seo-jin did. "Gentlemen," she said, stepping smoothly into the circle in a way that broke its energy without appearing to. "I'm so sorry to interrupt, mister. Ryu needs Director Bay in the corridor. Internal matter. Very quick." The board members looked at her. Bae Tae-young looked at her. "Miss Okafor," he said pleasantly, "we're in the middle of—" "I know." She met his gaze without flinching. "And I'm sure you'll be able to return to this conversation very shortly. The document you're referencing is actually under active legal review, so it would be better for everyone, including you, if this particular discussion happened internally first." She smiled. "As I'm sure you know." Silence. Then one of the board members cleared his throat. "Perhaps that's wise." Bae Tae-young's smile did not falter, but his eyes did something. They sharpened. Then, just as quickly, they smoothed again. "Of course," he said. When they stepped into the corridor, Ryu Seo-jin was already there. What followed was the most controlled, contained, and dangerously quiet conversation Tabena had ever stood next to. Ryu Seo-jin did not raise his voice. He never raised his voice. What he did was speak in a register so precise and so still that it had the effect of a temperature dropping in a room. "You were speaking about internal operations to shareholders," he said. "I was sharing context. Context that is under non-disclosure. The board has clearance. Selected board members have selected clearance, not all of whom were standing in that group." A pause. "I made an error in judgment," Bae Tae-young said, still smooth, still controlled. "Yes," Ryu Seo-jin said. "You did." He turned and walked back into the ballroom. Tabena started to follow. Bae Tae-young caught her elbow, not roughly, but firmly. That was you," he said quietly. She looked at his hand on her arm. He released it. "You moved before he even knew what was happening," Bae Tae-young said. His voice had lost its smooth edge. Underneath it was something sharper and more honest. "You protected him." "I protected the company." "No." He looked at her carefully. "You protected him." He walked away. Tabena stood in the corridor alone for 2 seconds. Then she walked back inside. She was not going to think about that. She was especially not going to think about the way Ryu Seo-jin had paused, just briefly, when he re-entered the ballroom and looked at her from across the room with an expression she had never seen on his face before. She was not going to think about it. She thought about it for the rest of the evening. If you're still here, bless you. Because this story is about to escalate in a way that I promise you did not see coming. Like this video right now if you're invested in Tabena, because she deserves that much from us. Comment below, Team Tabena or did Bae Tae-young have a point? Let's see where this community stands. 3 months after the shareholders' dinner, RSJ Holdings made an announcement. A merger, not small, one of the largest in the company's history. A strategic alliance with Park Enterprises, which would, pending board approval, make RSJ one of the 5 most powerful holdings companies in Asia. And the announcement came with a secondary piece of news, one that moved through the building in the particular way that corporate gossip always moved. Quietly, quickly, and everywhere at once. Ryu Seo-jin and Park Ji-soo. The alliance was being formalized. And not just on paper, personally. Tabena heard about it from Director Hwang, who told her with the energy of a man who could not entirely suppress how much he enjoyed delivering complicated information. She kept her expression neutral through the entire conversation, thanked him for the update, and walked back to her desk. She sat down. She opened her laptop. She stared at the screen. She thought, "This is fine." She thought, "This is completely professionally fine." She thought, "I need to go and talk to Somi." That evening, over 2 bowls of sundubu jjigae in a restaurant that steamed enough to hide anyone's face, Tabena told Somi everything. Somi listened without interrupting, which was the most unusual thing about the conversation, because Somi almost always interrupted. When Tabena finished, Somi set down her spoon. "Yan Tabena. Don't. You have feelings for this man. I have professional respect for this man. You crossed a ballroom in 12 seconds to stop someone from hurting him. I was protecting the company. Tobena. Somi. How many times have you done that? Moved before you even thought about it? Because that's not work, that's instinct. An instinct like that doesn't come from a job description. Tobena stared at her soup. He's announcing an engagement. Yes. To Park Ji-soo. Yes. Who is entirely appropriate for his world. Is she? Tobena looked up. What does that mean? Somi leaned forward. I mean, is she actually right for him, or is she right for the merger? It doesn't matter. It does matter. You know the difference between the two better than anyone. Tobena looked back at the soup. I'm going to look for other positions, she said. Somi went quiet. It's time, Tobena said. 3 years is a good run. I've done good work. You should what? Run? Move on. Because he's getting engaged. Because it's professionally the right time to Tobena. Somi's voice was gentle now. You can lie to me. I'm your friend, I'll forgive you. But don't lie to yourself. You know exactly why you're leaving. Tobena said nothing. She ate her soup. The next morning she came into the office early, sat at her desk, and drafted a resignation letter. Professional, clean, offering a 60-day transition, listing everything she would hand over and to whom. She printed it, she folded it, she put it in an envelope. She sat with the envelope in her hands for 11 minutes. Then she walked to his office. He was already there. Of course, he was always already there. Come in, he said before she could knock. She pushed open the door. Sit, he said, not looking up from the document in front of him. I'll stand, she said. He looked up. She walked to the desk and placed the envelope in front of him. He looked at it, then at her. What is this? My resignation. The office went completely still. He picked up the envelope, opened it, read. She watched his face. It did not move. That was, by now, a language she could read. And what it said was, he was surprised. Actually surprised, not performing composure. He was gathering it. He put the letter down. He looked at her. No, he said. Tobena's eyebrows lifted. Excuse me. No, that's not, you're not resigning. She stared at him. Ryu Seo-jin. And that is a formal resignation letter. I can see that. You cannot simply say no. And yet, she put both hands flat on his desk. You do not get to refuse a resignation. I am a person, not a contract extension. You're irreplaceable. Every person thinks they're irreplaceable until the company replaces them. No one replaces you. That is not the point. It was the first time in 3 years that she had raised her voice in this office. They both heard it. Tobena straightened, took a breath. I've given you 3 excellent years, she said in a quieter and more controlled voice. I have earned the right to make this decision for myself. You have, he agreed. Then, but I'm not accepting it. She looked at the ceiling briefly, then back at him. Why? He was looking at her steadily. You know why. I don't. You do. She crossed her arms. If you think this is about the merger announcement, isn't it? No. Then why now? 3 years, not one mention of leaving, then this week. People are allowed to move on. The announcement was 3 days ago. She went quiet. He stood up. This was new. He rarely stood during confrontational conversations. He stayed seated because it gave him the advantage of stillness. That he was standing now meant something. I need you to explain something to me, he said. His voice had changed. It was still quiet, but it was no longer the controlled quiet of a boardroom. It was something more human. Why are you running? I'm not running. You're leaving before something becomes complicated. Things are already complicated. The words came out before she intended. They both heard those too. The silence that followed was the kind that changes the atmosphere in a room. Not uncomfortable. Heavier than that, like the air before a storm. What? Ryu Seo-jin said carefully. Do you mean by that? Tobena uncrossed her arms. I mean that the company is going through a significant transition, a merger, new alliances. Your personal circumstances are changing. It is professionally sensible for me to— Stop. She stopped. Stop speaking in operations language, he said. You do that when you're avoiding something. I've learned that. She stared at him. You've learned that. I've worked with you for 3 years. And apparently studied me like a project brief. Yes, he said simply. She blinked. She had not expected that directness, even from him. Dit Tabena. It was the second time he had used her first name in this office. It landed the same way as the first time, heavier than it should have been. You're the only person in this company who treats this office like a space where honest things happen. You're the one who told me about Bay before I had confirmed it. You're the one who crossed that room at the dinner. You're the one who sends me the memo that says, you're wrong about this, and here is why, and means every word of it. He stopped. And now you're standing in front of me with a resignation letter and the expression of someone who has already made a decision they don't entirely believe in. She was quiet for a very long moment. You're announcing an engagement, she said finally. The silence that followed was different from all the others. Then where did you hear that? He said. The building. He looked at her. What building says? And what building says is usually accurate. He was quiet. Is it true? She asked. He said nothing for long enough that the answer was in the space. Tabena nodded slowly. Then I think, she said in a voice that was very carefully level, that my resignation is the correct professional response to a change in the company's strategic direction. That is the least honest thing you have ever said in this office. She felt heat rise in her face, not from embarrassment, from the specific frustration of being understood when you did not want to be. I will give you 60 days, she said. I'm not accepting 60 days. You don't have a choice. Neither do you. She picked up the envelope from the desk. I am keeping this. And you have until end of week to accept it, or I will take it directly to HR. He said nothing. She turned and walked out. Behind her, she heard nothing. No word, no movement, just silence. And in that silence, Ryu Seo-jin sat back down at his desk, looked at the space where the letter had been, and for the first time in many years, felt something that did not have a name in business. He felt afraid of losing something. The rest of the week passed like the period before a formal negotiation, both parties maneuvering, neither showing their hand. Tabena did her work. She did it, if anything, more efficiently than usual, because she was the kind of person who channeled feeling into function. Every report was crisp, every briefing was concise, every instruction she gave to the junior operations team was clear and documented. But she also made calls, 3 to be precise, to 3 companies that had approached her over the years with interest. She had deflected politely and filed away. She did not accept anything. She simply opened doors. Ryu Seo-jin watched her do all of this. He noticed the calls, not the content, but the pattern, the timing, the way she closed her office door for 20-minute windows she did not document. He also did something she did not expect. On Wednesday, he called her into his office and said, without preamble, I'm not marrying Park Ji-soo. Tabena looked at him. The merger, she said. The merger is proceeding regardless. The board wanted the engagement as a symbolic gesture. I've informed them it's not happening. She was very still. When did you make that decision? Monday morning. Monday morning. And the morning after she had handed him the resignation letter on Friday, she did not say anything. I'm telling you, he said, because you deserve to have the accurate information. You don't have to. You made a decision based on incomplete information. I'm correcting that. She looked at him. And what would you like me to do with this information? He held her gaze. I'd like you to consider withdrawing your resignation. Because the engagement is off. No. He paused. Because you belong here. The word, belong, did something to the room. Changed it somehow. She had told Park Ji-soo she belonged in his world because his world was work. Standing here now, she wondered if that had been entirely true, or if she had been telling herself the version that was safe. I'll think about it, she said. He nodded. She left. And what happened in the next 48 hours was the kind of escalation that reminded Tabena why working for Ryu Seo-jin was never, ever boring. Bae Tae-young moved, not subtly, not with his usual surgical patience. He moved like a man who had read the situation, calculated that the engagement was falling apart, connected it to the resignation, and concluded that his window was closing. He went to the board, not with gossip, with a formal complaint, structured, documented, professionally devastating. It alleged that the operations division under Tabena's leadership had been given inappropriate access to the special projects division without board approval, creating a potential legal liability for the company. And it further alleged that this access reflected a personal relationship between the CEO and his operations lead that compromised the company's governance standards. Tabena found out about it at 9:45 on a Thursday morning when the board chairman's office called her directly. She sat in her chair. She took a breath. Then she did the thing she had always done best. She got to work. By 11 o'clock, she had pulled every document related to her special projects access, every approval trail, every memo, every communication. She had them bound, indexed, and cross-referenced. She had documented every decision, every rationale, every outcome. She had numbers. She had dates. She had clearance authorizations with signatures. She walked into the boardroom at 11:15, set the binder in front of the chairman, and said, I understand you have questions about operations governance. I have answers. The board meeting lasted 4 hours. Bae-tae-young was in the room. He sat across the table from her and watched her dismantle his complaint methodically, document by document, with the calm precision of a woman who had never once made a decision she could not defend. The chairman asked the questions. She answered them. Ryu Seo-jin sat at the head of the table and said almost nothing because, as Tabena had long understood, there are times when the most powerful thing a leader can do is let someone else demonstrate why they were right to trust them. At the end of the 4th hour, the chairman closed his folder. I think, he said, this has been very clarifying. Bae-tae-young looked at his own folder. Director Bae, the chairman continued. I'd like to discuss the nature of this complaint and what it tells us about judgment. Perhaps we can schedule that separately. The room understood what that meant. Bae-tae-young understood too. He looked at Tabena one last time before he stood to leave, and for the first time since she had met him, he did not look smooth. He looked tired. You're very good at this, he said quietly. Yes, she said without malice. I know. When the room emptied, only Tabena and Ryu Seo-jin remained. She was stacking her documents. He was still at the head of the table, watching her. You prepared all of that since this morning, he said, since 9:45. In 90 minutes. I know where everything is. I keep everything organized. He was quiet. You knew this was coming, she said. It was not a question. I expected him to move eventually. And you let me handle it. Yes. She stopped stacking. Why? Because, he said, and for once his voice had no layer of strategy in it, I wanted you to see it, that you don't need me to protect you. You never did. She looked at him across the table. That's a very interesting thing to say, she said slowly, to a woman whose resignation you refused. He almost smiled. Yes, I noticed that contradiction. And I think, he said carefully, that refusing your resignation was not about the company. The boardroom was empty and very quiet. What was it about? She said. He stood up, walked around the table toward her, which was something he rarely did. He was usually a man who held distance across desks and tables. He stopped at a professional distance. But it was a closer professional distance than usual. I have never once, he said, wondered whether you were in that office because of my name or my money or the power of this company. She looked at him. For 3 years, you came in every morning and treated me like a person with a job that needed doing. Not a title, not a legacy, not a threat. He paused. Do you understand how rare that is in my world? She said nothing. She was listening. The engagement, he continued, was never about Jisoo. It was about what people in my world expect of me. Alliances, appearances, and I have been, he said with a rare quality of honesty that she had never heard in his voice before. Very accustomed to doing what people in my world expect. Until now, she said, until you handed me a resignation letter. She exhaled slowly. And that's a strange catalyst. You've been a strange thing in my life since the first morning you stood in that office and didn't speak. She looked away briefly, then back. You're being very direct. You've always responded better to directness than to management? That's accurate. He looked at her, not with the measuring gaze of a CEO, with something that was simply and plainly human. "Withdraw the resignation," he said. "That's still not a question." "No." He paused. "It is not." She looked at him for a long moment. She thought about 3 years of oat milk on Tuesdays and phones in the Han River, and memos that said "you're wrong," and the 12 seconds across a ballroom and a one-line message that said "already am." She thought about belonging. She thought about what Somi had said. "You know exactly why you're leaving." Where she also knew, standing here now, exactly why she had never quite managed to go. "I have conditions," she said. His eyes steadied. "Tell me." "My access stays, all of it." "Yes." "My contract is renegotiated properly, no informal arrangements. Already planned. And if you ever again refuse a resignation of mine?" She paused. "It better come with a better argument than no." The corner of his mouth moved. It was, in 3 years, one of the few times she had seen something that was fully, actually a smile. "I'll work on my vocabulary," he said. She looked at the binder in her hands. Then she set it down on the table. "Fine," she said. He looked at her. "I'm staying," she said. "But I'm telling you now, this is the last resignation letter you ever see from me. The next time I leave this building, and it'll be on my own terms, in my own time, with a proper send-off and a very good cake." He looked at her with an expression she had never catalogued before, because she had never seen it until this moment. "We'll order whatever cake you want," he said quietly. She picked up her binder. "You have a 3:30, she said. "Infrastructure update." "I know. And the Busan files need review by end of week." "I know. And you still owe Director Huang a response from last Tuesday." "I've been avoiding it." "I noticed." She walked to the boardroom door, pulled it open, and then stopped. She turned back. "Ryu Seo-jin." He looked at her. "Next time," she said, "lead with the honesty. It's faster." She walked out. Behind her, in an empty boardroom, he stood very still for exactly 7 seconds. Then he sat down. Pulled out his tablet, and for the first time in 3 years, found that he could not quite concentrate on what was on the screen. Because Tabena Okafor had just stayed, and somehow that single fact made the whole world feel significantly different from how it had felt this morning. Bae Tae-young resigned formally the following week. The board accepted his resignation with the kind of silence that meant everyone had known it was coming. He left the building in a single afternoon, which was how men who had overplayed their hand always left, quickly without ceremony. On his way out, he passed Tabena in the lobby. She was coming back in from a site visit, cobalt blue blazer, flat shoes, tablet already open. He stopped. "One question," he said. She looked at him. "Yes? Did you always know how this would end?" She considered it. "I know," she said honestly. "Not how, just that it would." He nodded. "You're extraordinary, you know." "I know." He laughed once, short and genuine. "Good luck to Benna." "Safe travels, Director Bay." He walked out. She walked in. 3 floors up, Ryu Seo-jin was standing at his window the way he always stood when he was thinking about something that mattered. His phone buzzed, a message from Tabena. "Your 3:30 moved to 4. Huang finally responded. "And I found an error in the Busan projection. Come see me when you're free." He read it. He typed back, "Coming now." He put the phone in his pocket. He walked out of his office, and whatever came next, the merger, the restructuring, the next complication the company would inevitably produce. He walked toward it with the quiet certainty of a man who had, for the first time, Wang stopped arranging his world and started actually living in it. Because sometimes the most powerful decision is not the merger or the strategy or the empire building. Sometimes it is simply the decision to stop letting the best thing in your life resign. If you're still here at the end of this story, I need you to tell me in the comments. Would you have handed in that second resignation letter, or would you have stayed? Drop your answer below. And if this story made you feel something, like, share, and subscribe. We tell stories like this every week, and if you love Tabena and the oat milk dropping, phone into the river, boardroom surviving, resignation refusing chaos of this Afro-Korean romance, you are in exactly the right place. Comment where you're watching from. We read every single one. See you in the next story.